Hello, and welcome to the latest edition of Citrus Insights. Now, for those of you that haven't had the chance to see a version of Citrus Insights before, what I try and do is to look at topics or debate topics that either seem to be topics that come up a lot from some of our existing clients, or that just seem to be topics that are coming up a lot in the media, and find an expert that I can talk to you about that particular topic. So today I'm going to be talking to an industry expert about a subject that just seems to be something not only being asked a lot about by our existing clients, but also that I'm reading an awful lot about in the media. And it's not always the easiest of subjects to know how to approach. So today I'm going to be talking about long-term care, and I'm delighted to welcome my industry expert today, our guest of Roberta Svile.
Hi, thank you so much, Richard, for having me.
Thank you so much for joining us, Roberta. And for those of you that maybe don't know Roberta, Roberta is the founder of Local Care Advisor, an independent later life care consultancy supporting financial advisors, private client solicitors, and families to navigate the complexities of the care system and find the best care solutions for their loved ones. With a background advising high net worth clients and hands on experience in the care sector, Roberta supports clients across the full care journey, from identifying the most appropriate care options and ongoing care monitoring to acting as a professional health and welfare attorney where needed, bridging the gap between financial planning and real life care decisions. Roberta is also a passionate advocate for dementia care and a core member of the Bromley Dementia Friendly community, working to raise dementia awareness across local businesses and organisations. So, Roberta, I think maybe we start for those, thinking about long-term care or maybe just wanting to understand more. Let's start with a really basic question, which is, what do we really mean when we talk about long-term care?
Yeah, absolutely. Basic question, I'll probably give you a basic definition to this. So, long-term care is a continuous support provided to someone who can no longer manage their daily life independently. And whether that is due to their age or frailty, illness or disability. And that support can be provided in your own home or in a residential care setting.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. And I know we're going to explore more about those options today, which is great. Suppose one of the questions we also experience is, when should clients, dare I say, not just clients, or maybe their families even, start planning for their care ideally? When is the right time?
Um, Ideally, and I know it will kind of sound unsettling to some, but the questions about long term care should enter financial conversations in the mid 50s to early 60s. And, it's not because the care is needed there, but because that's when all of your options and all of your choices are still wide open. And this is when your financial advisor, can work out the best scenario for you and to ensure that you have the best outcome later in life, without having to compromise on your lifestyle, on the quality of care you will be receiving, and also on your children's and grandchildren's future, their inheritance, if that's what you decided to do. And obviously, that will allow you to spend the rest of your life with dignity that you deserve. So I say the earlier the conversations, the more control families will have.
Okay, interesting. And I suppose, when I think about the number of clients asking about this top questions about this topic, or when I'm just reading information on it, it just seems to be more of a crisis, but there's so much more written about long-term care now than there used to be. Why is it becoming such a hot topic that seems to be reading about or people are asking more about these days?
I think probably first of all is down to demographics and the world that we live in. So, in the UK, we live in a fast aging population, and I guess not only UK, the whole world is a fast aging population. And, with the advancements of modern medicine and technologies, we tend to live longer. And obviously, what's once been seen as a terminal condition is now a chronic condition. It's something we live with the help of modern treatment and support. And that's why the demand for care is rising rapidly, because, UK care system is facing a widening gap between demand and provision. I'm going to read this bit because this is a research. So, research estimates that by 2038, so in 12 years, we'll see around 57% increase in people aged over 65 needing care, alongside 29% rise in working age adults requiring support. So now that second figure often surprises people, but it's purely because we're living longer, retirement age is increasing, and we're seeing more long-term health conditions that were traditionally associated with later life, and they are becoming more common. Dementia, for example, is one of the major drivers behind this. So, for example, with my dementia community hat on it, currently we had nearly 1 million people living with dementia in the UK. And this figure is set to rise to 1.4 million in the next 15 years by 2040. So, now, because the nature of the disease and its progression, the need for care at some point is inevitable. And it's projected that economic cost of dementia will increase pretty much double, from 42 billion to 90 billion by 2040. So the care will be required.
Okay, thank you. Wow, lots of information there. So we've got this perfect storm, really, haven't we? On the plus side, people are living longer. Your point, that's a positive modern medicine. I guess the flip side is the options that are open to people, the demand and the strain on the system, and therefore your point overlook, let's try and, please try and have a look, think about this earlier. Don't leave it till it's too late, and we'll come on to that. So now we've got that kind of really not great picture for everyone, but it's seen
I'm
as a kind
so
of
sorry.
no, it's what it is, right? And to encourage people to think about this at the an earlier time. What are the different options that are open to people seeking care?
So primarily, there are three pathways. One of them would be care at home, which ranges from, ever so light support, such as companionship, to multiple care visits a day or night, to a full live-in care or even a live-in nurse support. Um, then the next option would be residential care, and residential care ranges from assisted living accommodation, such as sheltered and extra care housing. I'm not sure whether people are familiar with the terminology, but these type of residences are where people have their own flat. But there are also communal areas for them to enjoy, cafes, lounges, gardens where they can socialize with other residents. And at the same time, they have a concierge or a warden that is there during the day, that man kind of minds the door and also looks after them. And also there is a care company operating within the building that people can book separately, or they can bring their own preferred provider to assist them in their own flat. Now, a slight level up would be a residential care, which is a 24/7 care provision in a care home or a nursing home. And both of those options offer specialist dementia care nowadays. And then finally, there is a hybrid model. So where person starts with home care and, the community support, such as day centers, perhaps, going to lunch clubs, activity and befriending groups, such as dementia cafes. And then they transition into residential care later in life as their care needs change. But what I think matters the most here is that not the type of care, but whether it's truly fits the person's needs, their personality, and the stage of life they're at.
So, Roberta, listening to those options, that's really interesting. So, there are a few different options. How do you decide or agree with families or individuals what the right approach is for them?
Well, first of all, when I meet with my clients, we have a really in-depth discussion of what the wishes and aspirations are for their loved one or themselves. The budget, the location, and everything that matters to them. So I do take this very in-depth case study, and then I look into the options that will meet most of those requirements, because it's difficult to find the place where everything is going to be perfect, but we try to, we try to make sure that it ticks as many boxes as possible.
Okay.
And I always say that one home or one care provider could be absolutely perfect for one person, but completely wrong for the other. And it's because we are very different. We have different characters, we have different expectations. So meeting the family and hearing from them what's important is the key.
Okay.
And then obviously the budget is also very, very important. Um, at the moment in the UK, if we look at the costs, the home care cost anything between £25 per hour to £40 per hour. And, that's a UK average. Now we are in London and surrounding, London surrounding areas. So obviously the cost around here is anything between £30 to £48 per hour. If you are living into more remote area, those hourly kind of hourly rates will be charged as a minimum hour visit. So some providers say, oh, we'll come and visit you, but we will be charging minimum of 2 or 3 hours per visit. So obviously all of that accumulates. And then another option, for example, live-in care, costs anything between 1,200 a week to £2,000 a week. The higher end being where the needs are very complex and often delivered by registered nurses. And then obviously you do have home care, the care home fees, where you are charged on kind of a lower end, the local authority type of care homes. It's costing between 1,200 to 1,500 per week. And then you have premium luxury, living starts at about 1650 and can range over 200 and 2500 per week, and even higher for nursing or nursing dementia costs. So it's a big investment, it's a massive investment that someone's going to be making, so it's important to get it right.
Okay, and this is your point around it sounds like it's very individual, need to work it through with the family. Budget is budget is one of those conversations that needs to be had, but actually your point, it needs to be had in the context of a number of other things as well, not just what's the budget. It is the location, it is what is the exact type of care. It is, well, what's the difference, from being at home to being in a residential care home, all of these factors. You can't help but you can't help but sort of look at the fact and go, it does seem very expensive. Is it really about the level of care and the location? Is that
It is, to be honest with you, we pay for care because, the care is human. And you're paying for skilled staff, which is in incredibly short supply at the moment and very high demand. Currently there are, we've checked, and there are 78,000 vacancies across the care sector. So it gives you a good picture of challenges, with recruitment and staff retention that the industry is facing. When you pay for care, you pay for 24-hour support, of very often high complexity care, especially if your loved one lives with dementia.
okay? And 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 I suppose, and maybe a number of us will know we hear the bad stories, right? You don't know, tend to hear the good stories. So as in many things, you hear the bad stories, the horror stories, the pictures and the videos that have secretly been captured of bad things happening. How do you try and pick dare I say, a good care home?
A good care home. Well, I think it goes back to what good care home will be for one particular person. You know, what would a good care home means to you? Now, as a professional, a good care home, I just don't look at Care Quality Commission ratings or online reviews alone, because Care Quality Commission, and as an example, came under a bit of scrutiny in recent years, similar to what we have seen with Ofsted, because inspections can sometimes reflect just a moment in time rather than day-to-day reality in a care home. So, in my view, and having worked in the industry, I know that a care home might hold a good or outstanding rating for years, even though the management or a team who has achieved that particular rating has changed long ago. And obviously, every care home will have a good days and bad days, and more challenging days rather than bad days, I guess. But it's also important to see that the Care Quality Commission framework is evolving, which is very positive. But my opinion is, and also many others in the industry, that the ratings alone don't tell the full story. So for me, the good care would be, is the residents feeling safe? Are the residents feeling safe and reassured? Also, are they being known as a person and not a task? Um, are they having meaningful interactions and not just care being delivered? Is their dignity maintained, and personal routines? And importantly, a settled and supported team, because the energy carries through to the residents.
And that sounds, this kind of knowledge and information. So, I mean, that's, in terms of that's the kind of thing a local care advisor will have a better working knowledge of compared to, not just the reviews that are online from your perspective. It's also that local knowledge, real knowledge from having visited a number of these establishments and spoken to, people who are in the homes, etc. And therefore leads me on. I have to ask: are there any really obvious red flags if somebody's looking at this? Well, what is it they need to avoid?
Well, a red flag to me would be a high staff turnover, or heavy reliance on a care agency staff. And, don't get me wrong, you do have months where, yes, you will see an increase of care agency staff being present. For example, summer, everyone is entitled to have a holidays during summer. So obviously, holiday covers are being, kind of holidays are being covered by agency staff. But sometimes you go into a care home and you just see an agency staff, because they usually wear different uniforms, and that's what's concerning. And also, task focused care, often a sign of understaffing. But at the same time, it could also be a care home culture. So again, from my side of view, knowing kind of the industry insights and having, contacts across the industry, it's actually a very tight knit industry. Everybody knows everyone. Teams move across and so on and so on. So obviously, we do tend to hear a bit of gossip, of what goes where, as probably any industry happens. But then also another thing I look at is, are the residents left disengaged for long periods, and especially in the afternoons once the daily activities have ended. So if I go and inspect a care home, I usually go around 4 o'clock.
Okay.
It's my kind of triage time. Because that's a challenging time in any care home. And then
Okay.
also poor or inconsistent communication with families. and then also very much a defensive or dismissive management with, when concerns are being raised.
Okay. There's a lot to think about. There's obviously a lot of options there. I think just listening to there's been an awful lot which is really helpful about the human side, the personal side, the relationship side, the what's the right place, how does it feel the right place, and then I suppose I have to say, well, how do you balance that with, your point going back a few minutes, budget? So how does a local care advisor, for example, work with financial advisors typically to support clients?
Absolutely. So I think, when we work with financial advisors, it happens when they're clients who, trust their financial advisors, and go to them for, you know, for any advice and recommendation, because that's what you do. When you trust your solicitor, when you've been working with them, or trust your financial advisor, you naturally go to them for support on any kind of matters. So when people start asking their financial advisors, oh, what's going to happen when, if my mom or dad needs to go into care, what are the care options? What are the care funding provision? Also, what will happen when my money runs out? And I think, financial advisors, they are incredibly good in organizing the pots and your investments, and getting annuities, and making sure that the money doesn't run out, with your care funding. But I think giving the reassurance to clients, and answering their care type of questions, unless they have a really good care industry insight, it might be very difficult for them. And this is where care advisors come into place, to give that almost, statutory advice on, the care benefits that might be available to you, explaining, what the NHS funding is going to be available, or not is, but probably might going to be available depending on care needs, local authority funding, and all in between, explaining, what to expect during hospital discharge process, what are your rights, where you can say no, and very rightly so, and also at the same time, helping you to navigate through that transition into a care setting or care at home, and making sure that, your decisions are made without a pressure and without a rush, and with, good clear mind.
Okay, thank you. And I suppose my last question would therefore be thinking, just probably made me think even more about the number of things that do need to be thought about when thinking about care. Um, and if I'm an individual, either for myself or a family or relative, thinking for a relative right now about the subject of care, where do I start? Having listened to you and all that's available, all those different options, where should I start? If I know I need to make that move, I just haven't been able to, maybe haven't known what to do. I've now listened to this and thought, I need to do something. What would your advice be in terms of where I should start?
Well, my advice would be pick up the phone and call a care advisor. And I'll tell you where to start and answer all the questions that you may have, about the care, about specific conditions, and progression of a certain things, and what the future may hold. But secondly, I would say you go to your financial advisor and see, where your financial situation takes you. And together, the way that things work is that we can bounce off one another, as professionals. If your client has a question about, um, I don't know, as an example, oh, my mum's being discharged, I'm going to be able to answer the question. But how I'm going to fund my mum's care, that's a financial advisor who's going to be able to give you all sort of options. So the sooner you plan for for the future, for your, I always tell my clients to have plan A, plan B, and plan C if they want to when it comes to care, because that's what allows them to not to crumble when the care crisis happens. And eventually, we all aging, and the care crisis might happen when the needs will change. And suddenly, the one care might not be an option anymore, but having a plan B, it will take you through that stress, it will take you through the minimum stress, through it with a minimum stress
Okay.
as possible, knowing that somebody stands your back.
Have a plan, have a
Have a
backup
plan.
plan, and have a backup
Have
plan
a backup
for
plan
that.
and a
That's
backup
great.
plan and one more.
That's great. Okay. Roberta, it's an incredibly complex and sometimes emotionally difficult topic. So I really appreciate your honesty, your warmth you've brought to this, how much you focus on, kind of the person has really come through. So look, we really appreciate your insights. Thank you so much. And I hope that in the future you'll come back and talk to me again. Would be really great if that's okay.
Absolutely. Thank you for having me. It's a never-ending topic. So if you if you come up with more questions, I will be more than happy to help.
Roberta, that's
Thank
fantastic.
you.
Thank you very much. And that's it for Citrus Insights for today. Thank you so much for watching. Look forward to seeing you again soon. But for today and for now, bye bye.